Okay, at this point, let's look at some more advanced devices that are emitters, and I want to focus briefly on the helium neon laser and re-explain how that works in this course. And so the laser is light amplification via stimulated emission and resonance, hence the term laser. And if you look at the helium neon laser and you took it apart, you'd have this glass tube with helium neon gas in there, and you have a cathode and an anode, and what they do is they put a very high voltage on this, essentially that you create a lightning bolt between these, and that breaks down the gas into a plasma, right? So that's ionized gas. And so then you've got all these neon atoms that basically get enough energy to emit red light. But what happens is you have that stimulated emission, which we talked about previously in the course, where if one photon emits, then it can run into another excited neon atom, create two photons that are in phase. Those two can go on and find more excited neon atoms and create four photons in phase, and the process multiplies and multiplies. A key point for this, though, is that all the photons are in phase. And so one of the requirements for the laser is that these output couplers, which is a partial mirror, and this side, which is a perfect mirror, has to be some integer number of half wavelengths, because otherwise you wouldn't have a condition where you have resonance where when it's reflected, its peaks and valleys would line up with the light that's going in either direction. So if I have light going this way or this way, all the peaks and valleys need to line up. So to have that, you have to have some integer half number of wavelengths. Notice I divided by refractive index here, because if this was not air, let's say this is a semiconductor laser, then you'd have to divide the wavelength by the refractive index of the medium to figure out the resonance condition. And because you have this resonance condition, okay, what happens is there's really only one or two or a couple wavelengths that could satisfy resonance, and then as a result, those that satisfy resonance are of a very narrow spectral width. And so a neon emission could be broader, but for any laser you're going to see, even if it is broad, it's going to collapse to a very narrow, spectrally narrow point here on the wavelength versus intensity plot. Again, because of this interference requirement for an integer number of half wavelengths. So if there was a little bit of emission that could occur over here, it wouldn't meet the criteria here, and it wouldn't be strongly emitted in the lasing. So once one of these takes off, it dominates. So once you get one of these modes here taking off like this, at this wavelength, it's going to gobble up all the energy and essentially go into the laser generation of the laser beam. Another type of device is a light-emitting diode. We'll be using those for the white lamps today. I'll talk about white lamps in a second, but I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. But a light-emitting diode, you basically bring in electrons. This is the conduction band. This is the band gap. And the electrons come over here. You take over holes, which is positive charge, just the absence of an electron. They recombine, the charge annihilates, and it gives you a photon out. One of the challenges, though, is that you have this inside a diode, okay, which is P and N-type material, which is semiconductor, and you got to get the light out. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but you'll see if you go to some angles, some of the light could be trapped and internally reflected. So how do they make white LEDs? We'll be using that in the lab this week, most likely. Well, a white LED, there's two approaches. One, you could basically get all the colors of LEDs you want, shine their light and mix it to get white light like you see here, but that's costly and it doesn't make a lot of sense from a cost perspective. And so the low-cost way is you basically take a blue LED and then you put a yellow light-emitting phosphor, which absorbs part of the blue light and reconverts it to yellow light. That's one of the things you have in the Cree LED shown here. So here's your optical output power versus wavelength. Here's the blue LED, which in this case is indium gallium nitride for the semiconductor material. That comes out, and then you've got the yellow phosphor, yttrium, aluminum, garnet, cerium, which then absorbs blue light, converts it to lower energy yellow light, and overall, this isn't perfect white light, but your eye perceives a mixture of the blue and the yellow, which has some red and some green in it, as white. There are limitations, though. If you looked at this, use this kind of LED in an art museum, let's say an art museum had a nice cyan background of a picture of a sea or something, there wouldn't be as much light shine from the LED on the painting, so the cyan colors at 500 nanometers would look dimmer because there's not as much light to reflect off those pigments. And so if you use LEDs for high quality illumination, you typically want to put more phosphors in here with more peaks to make it more of a broad emission like you would expect with an incandescent light bulb. What about organic light emitting devices? Well, they're very similar like LEDs, but they're made from organic semiconductors, which is great because that can be done inexpensively, but they also degrade more quickly. So think of plastic. It's great, but it's also not the most durable material either. And so you inject holes in electrons and they emit. This is an example of layers that you can use to build up an OLED. And we're very familiar with a lot of the commercialization activities going on with OLEDs these days. So at this point, do a bit more review, then take a break, and we'll keep going from there.